How's it going, everybody? It's the CDH Warrior and
the CDH Dad, and welcome back to the Mondays on Mondays presentation. Once again, we just want to kind of do the disclaimer, we're not medical professionals, we don't have the background in that, anything as far as psychology or that support group, social support, those type of things are not things that we're trained in. But we do have a lot of experience. Over 2 decades that I've had the experience with 2 children that both had special needs in very unique type situations. And part of the reason we do this is so that we can help bring some awareness and discussion on that. So thank you very much again for joining us.
And with that, let's roll the title.
And as we said, welcome back again for Mondays on Mondays. And we go through a myriad of different topics, a lot of things that we kind of see from social media and some of the questions that come up and some of the discussion groups that we're involved with. And from that, we kind of pick a topic for what we're going to discuss here. One of the other things we do have is there is an email address. So I know that that is included in the presentation. So you can look at that. It's mondaysonmondays4@gmail.com. But it'll be shown here a little bit later. But part of what I wanted to bring up in today's topics for discussion is, you know, we talk a lot about CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And you've heard the numbers, the statistics, and some of the impact that we've been through and our experiences. In our particular situation, it was a surprise. We didn't know about it until our son was born. And right there in the delivery is when we learned of the problems. That's when the doctors first learned of the problems. A lot of the technology has improved so that this can be detected further ahead. In my daughter's case, it was an issue with aplastic anemia. And it really developed within a week's time from the first time that we noticed telltale signs that there were issues because of bruising, and went to the doctor. The doctor started some preliminary tests. But as I've discussed in some of this, it's an issue that, you know, the doctors don't necessarily look for a worst case scenario because it's a rare occurrence that these happen. But in our case, it was within a week. We were fortunate to have a doctor who lived behind us who helped do the diagnosis and do some work in her case and determined that it was aplastic anemia, and she was in the hospital immediately. So within a week's time this occurred. So there wasn't a lot of time to prepare and deal with the personal aspects that come into play with children with special needs, being the parent and having to go through this. So part of what I wanted to come up here is discussing just some of the impact it has on the individuals, the parents, the families, the whole dynamic that's involved. You will see me going back and forth on some notes that I have here. And one of the things that I would recommend is that, you know, once you know that there is a diagnosis and then there is an issue, is work to develop and find out as much information as you can, but also start working on some of the other things that are going to impact your life and what is going to be happening. Because it is a very unique situation, and it's hard to find a lot of people who have been through those type of situations who can help you in this. So sometimes you have to look for the experts. What were you going to say?
That was part of why I started this channel. Was originally I started considering doing a video series about life with CDH in general. And then, what have we been doing this for? 3 months?
At least a couple of months, yeah.
We kind of branched off and decided, okay, we were going to do the Mondays on Monday, and then I was going to kind of do a series specifically aimed towards CDH.
Right, and more of what we're trying to do here is deal with the questions that come up with parents.
As a parent.
And we've been closely allied with CDH because of your work with the CDH awareness group.
Yeah.
But it's also one I follow along with aplastic anemia, also graft versus host disease, and some of the other groups, so that I see some of those items and feedbacks and some of the things that are going on. But one of the things that I just wanted to kind of go through is, like I said, I'm going to hit some bullet points on some items that I pulled from online sources. But when you have a child that has special health care problems, needs, it makes a major impact on the family. One of the first things is you have to consider how it impacts you, and also the relationship you have with your spouse and the family there, because the two of you are going to have to be your own support system and help support one another and agree with one another and go through the details that are involved in this. You're going to have to work on how can you involve and utilize your family members and also your network and safety net of contacts and people you know that can help you in this situation. When the diagnosis is clear, there's still going to be a lot of uncertainties, because you're going to start spending a lot of time with the medical groups trying to determine how to progress in terms of the treatment, what's going to be needed there. But then you're going to have to be working on the long-term plan of where things are going to go, and sometimes it's going to change directions. And you're also going to have to deal with the financial impact of this, because it can be devastating when you start talking about some of the long-term effects in terms of what it costs on the family, how you're handling health care, how you're handling insurance, how you're handling work situations and having to be away from work and those type of things. So it's, there's a lot of things that you've got to worry about. You've got to worry about your own emotions, and you're going to be mentally and physically exhausted. But it's also, when you get the first diagnosis, you're going to go through some questioning of yourself. Is it my fault? Is it something I've done? Is there something I could have done differently? A lot of those type stress issues and psychological items that you're going to go through. So you've got to figure out, how are you going to deal with that first? It can be stress on the marriage, because you've got to figure out who's going to be where, doing what, how you're going to handle the finances, how you're going to handle if you have other children and other family members that you've got to deal with, and how that impacts the things. You've got to figure out how you're going to support your child. In some cases, you're not going to be able to spend all of your time away from work. You're going to have to go back and forth. You're going to have to take care of the family. You're going to have to take care of other things. So you've got to get past that feeling of guilt of not being able to be there for every step through your child's treatment and development and issues that are involved in the hospital settings and those type of things. You may also have to make some very taxing medical decisions. And I'll go through a personal example. Is with my daughter and her treatment. She went through a bone marrow transplant and ended up with an infection after her immune system had been depleted, and in preparation for the bone marrow transplant, and before the bone marrow had fully engrafted. So she had an infection with no immune system. And my wife and I had to have a serious discussion, and we actually signed. I was not able to be there. She was there at the time, because this occurred really within 24 hours. But we had to sign a DNR, do not resuscitate, because her heart rate was over 200, her blood pressure was high. A lot of those things were going on. We knew that there could be serious impact, and we had discussions with the doctors that if it got to a point, they could clinically keep her alive, but there could have been serious damage involved in this. So that was a very difficult decision to have to make. So these are the top things that you may have to go through. This is where you'll be using your family, but then also any resources you may have through your church or religious group, through the hospital, social support group, those type things of people that can help you through that. You can go through the fear of medical treatments and their outcomes. In our case, I know with my son, it was one. There were sometimes within just a few hours, decisions were changed in terms of what treatment was going to be necessary, what surgeries might be necessary, those type things. So you've got to be able to work very closely with the doctors and feel comfortable with a lot of the discussions that are going on. But it's also one of you've got to be able to ask the questions and be totally honest in what you're doing.
Yeah.
In my daughter's case, it was one that there was discussion because she was going to have total body irradiation. When you're doing this with an 18-month-old, it's the question of how much damage can be done with too much radiation. And we had some very strong discussions with the doctors to go through this and came up with a treatment plan that lessened the amount of radiation that was required that would meet the needs of what she was going to have. So these are top things that you'll have to go through. You have to go through questioning sometimes misdiagnosis and some of the items that go on there, because you may have multiple medical professionals involved. In our case, it was at a teaching hospital, so you had interns and residents involved in that. And they were still in a learning process. So in some cases, you have to be at a point where you may know more about the medical situations than the doctors do. And in most cases, it's not that there's a magic pill that this is going to take care of things. It's going to be some trial and error in those, and you've got to deal for that.
I think honestly, so much we decide that there must be some magic pill or treatment.
Yeah.
I go through this dealing with CDH, and it's one. I discuss this occasionally in my Thursday videos, but it's one. There's always the assumption that with the patch, we're completely cured, and that's not the case.
No, because I know in your case, we knew that the patch very likely would come loose. You're 28 now. We haven't had that situation, but we have seen others who have gone through that type of situation. So that's a thing that you've got to deal with. One of the things that you're going to have a fear about is emergency situations. What are you going to do when something serious happens and you're at home or you're out, going somewhere with your child? How do you handle that? And it puts you always on edge and always under pressure. And that can be very taxing for an individual to have to go through those things. How do you tell your family and friends what's going on? Because, you can't go through a lot of the normal parents' day out type situations because you've got a child that can't be exposed to some of these type situations. How do you deal with some of that aspect of it? You've got to regularly be monitoring your child's condition, those type things. And you've got to try and define what is the new normal.
Yeah.
Some of the key points I wanted to bring out is something that I found, as I said, just on a childhood intervention program.
Yeah.
Most states will have these, and something that will help parents that have unique situations with their children where they can bring in professionals that can help, and those can bring in outside resources that will help through this. But the first thing as a parent when you're dealing with a child with special needs is you need to take care of yourself first, because the most important thing is that you have the energy, the stamina, the capability to help take care of your child. But you can't let that risk your own personal health and well-being. you've got to be able to do that. You've got to go through a balance of what is necessary in your normal life. You're having to take care of that child, but you may have other children you've got to deal with that are not disabled. You've got to figure out how to balance that in case. The other is you've got to think of your child, if it's a special needs child and has special medical conditions, is this is not where you are dealing with a patient. You've got to remember that you are dealing with your child, and you still have to interact and treat things in a normal way as you would as a parent. So that can be difficult. You've got to balance dealing with your non-health issued children, those that are, quote, normal. How are you dealing with your parents, with your brothers and sisters, other family members, and how do you work out that normal interaction in there?
I laugh at that. I'll kind of jump in and expand on that because I often get the question in the CDH group, how do you deal with having a normal sibling? And it's like, what is normal? And they laugh at me, but when you have a sibling that has gone through aplastic anemia as a toddler, there's really no such thing as normal.
There's no such thing as normal, and that's one that we've had to deal with, is that, you know, as a friend told us, we would not have normal children. She apologized after my son's birth and other issues and explained that was not what she expressed.
What she meant.
But it was also one, she helped us through our situation, but then we helped her through hers, because later on she had a child who was trisomy 18, which is a fatal childhood
was this Robin?
Birth issue. Yes. So it's one of those things that we had to deal with. So one of the other things that you've got to do is you've got to be able to reach out for information. Find every good source that you can find, every good expert you can find. And as you go through this journey, you will find that you become long-term friends with a lot of people you've met along the way. And these are people who will sincerely try and help. Most medical professionals are kind of taught to kind of stay back away from personal interaction with the families and with the patients. And I can understand that, because it is very, very
it's hard to separate yourself
difficult
out of.
for these medical professionals that work in these cases. In my daughter's case, we were dealing with nurses that were working in a transplant unit. And in that case, they knew that in a lot of cases, their patients very well would not survive.
Yeah.
So they had to keep themselves distanced from that. The same way with the nurses in the NICU units. Yeah, a lot of these will survive, but they will have special cases where they will lose children, and it is very difficult for them. So kind of understand that support, that, you know, they've got to kind of balance their lives, and then, you know, you have to figure out how to balance your life. Build a support system for yourself. Not just your family, but there's a whole community of people out there that you can deal with. This is your friends, your church, your family. There are formal support groups that you can find if you start digging around. And now with social media, there's a lot of those capabilities.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find some interesting people that you collect, people that you may have met and not necessarily been close to, but you find out, we're in your time of need, these are people that will step up and come and help you.
Yeah.
So, you know, we, with my son and my daughter, we were both in cases where the treatment center was 4 hours from our home.
Yeah.
But we conveniently had people who just happened to be in the neighborhood and would come by and say, hey, you know, can you step away for a little bit? We'll go out and get a bite to eat, or we'll do something like that. So these are things that actually give you some reprieve and some help when you're going through this process. Focus on the big picture. Every day, look at the progress that's being made. There are little milestones every day. There are setbacks. and there are issues that develop, but you try and look at how each step develops, how things are improving. And one of the things that's very helpful, I know my wife was very good at this, is keeping a notebook. You keep all the medical reports and test results, a lot of the things like that. You also keep notes of things that you can keep so that you can look back and see what's going on. And in many cases, this is helpful when you're dealing with the medical professionals, because you've got a better sense of what's going on. They've got multiple patients. They're trying to look at all these forms and files and all the medical information on these things. So they're really only able to look at what's happened in the last 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
Whereas you're able to look at things at a much longer scale. So make use of that. And then, as I said, focus on your child as a child and not as a patient. So these are just some of the points that we just wanted to bring out.
I think this will be a part 1 of 2, probably.
It could be. I mean, we'll hit on this topic again at another time. But the key point I wanted to bring up here is, first and foremost, determine how to take care of yourself and how to work with your spouse, significant other, your family, and determine the roles and situations that are necessary. And these will change from time to time. I know in our case it was one that I ended up having to go back to work. My wife was able to stay at the hospital, but a lot of cases I would leave work on Friday afternoons, drive to the hospital, she'd take the truck, she would take off, and she'd take the weekend just to recoup and recover, because it is very demanding and very taxing. So look at the long term of what you need to help take care of yourself so that you will be in good condition to help take care of your child. So anything else you had on that?
Not that I know of.
In that case, once again, thanks for joining us for Mondays on Mondays. Again, we're not medical professionals, but we're trying to provide you with awareness and understanding of the journey that we've been on, and hopefully get your feedback on questions and concerns and things you may have found that were helpful that we can spread to others. So have a great Monday and a great week.
Have a great day.